in years. Virgin birth. 145 But the angel said to him, Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. Luke 1:7-13. New Revised Standard Version. The question of Joseph. Despite the virgin birth, it is generally accepted by Christians that Mary was married to Joseph prior to the birth of Jesus. This understanding is derived from verses in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Eliezer became the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Of her was born Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Matthew 1:16. New American Bible. Now this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found with child through the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Matthew 1:18-19. New American Bible. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. Luke 2:4-5. New Revised Standard Version. 146. Development of the Christian doctrine. For many, the concept of Mary's marriage to Joseph brings into serious doubt the whole idea of virgin birth. In fact, Vincent Taylor theorizes, it is also possible, and even probable, that the Matthean genealogy ended originally with the words, and Joseph begat Jesus, who is called Christ, Mount I. 16. Ibid. p.10. Interestingly, the Quran totally supports the idea of Jesus's virgin birth. The context of the Quranic narration conveys the clear message that Mary was neither married, nor unchaste, nor touched by any man prior to the birth of Jesus. Conclusions. The virgin birth is reported in the Bible, the Apocrypha and the Quran. Though the details are somewhat different, in all cases Mary is held in great esteem, and her virgin pregnancy is recognized as a great honor. Chapter 9. The Crucifixion. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, Certainly this man was innocent. Luke 23:44-47. New Revised Standard Version. The Christian doctrine that Jesus died for men's sins presupposes his death. However, since it is an important part both of the doctrine of salvation and of the doctrine of resurrection, which we will discuss in the next chapter, it seems important to review the crucifixion at this point. Almost all Christians believe that Jesus was tortured and then crucified to death. Still, there is a great deal of conjecture and speculation about the last days of Jesus. As mentioned before, some rather radical theories exist regarding the crucifixion, including that someone else was crucified instead, or that Jesus did not die but was in a coma when removed from the cross. There are no reports of the event from neutral or even hostile sources. For Christians, the only source of information on this extremely important event has been the Bible. Even the Gospels are full of contradictions regarding this event. 147,148. Development of the Christian doctrine. Matthew and Mark. The Gospel of Matthew gives the following account. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus inside the praetorium and gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped off his clothes and threw a scarlet military cloak about him. Weaving a crown out of thorns, they placed it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spat upon him and took the reed and kept striking him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the cloak, dressed him in his own clothes, and led him off to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a Cyrenian named Simon. This man they pressed into service to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they gave Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he had tasted it, he refused to drink. After they had crucified him, they divided his garments by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And they placed over his head the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and the other on his left. Those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself, if you are the Son of God. And come down from the cross." Likewise the chief priests with the scribes the crucifixion. 149 And elders mocked him and said, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. So he is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" The revolutionaries who were crucified with him also kept abusing him in the same way. From noon onward, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:27-46. New American Bible. While the Gospel of John, like Matthew above, narrates that the procurator's soldiers were the ones who took Jesus inside to torture him and crucify him, the Gospel of Mark 15:1 from the New American Bible again states that as soon as morning came, the chief priests with the elders and the scribes, that is, the whole Sanhedrin, held a council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Generally, however, Mark's account is similar to that given in Matthew's Gospel. Luke's narration of Jesus' death is significantly different from that of Matthew and Mark. According to Luke, Jesus was sent by Pilate to Herod, then back to Pilate. Then he narrates that Jesus delivered a short sermon en route to his crucifixion. Please note that according to a footnote, not all ancient manuscripts contain the statement in double brackets in verse 34. As they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him, and made him carry it behind Jesus. 150. Development of the Christian doctrine. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. Luke 23:26-34. New Revised Standard Version. The end of Luke's narration of the crucifixion is at the very beginning of this chapter. John's account. In John's account, Pilate tried to release Jesus, but the Jews insisted that he be crucified. Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be crucified. And they took Jesus, and led him away. And he bearing his cross went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and 2 other with him, on either side, one, the crucifixion, 151 and Jesus in the midst. And Pilate wrote a title, and put it on the cross. And the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. John 19:16-19. King James Version. John's report of the events immediately preceding the crucifixion has Jesus carrying the cross himself. The inscription on the cross is different here from that in the other Gospels. And John has many details that are quite different from the other narrations. Thus there are many discrepancies among the narrations of Jesus' death. From the Bible alone it is impossible to know what really happened at that time. Some of these discrepancies can be understood by the fact that Jesus' contemporaries had different understandings of his death. Willie Markson clearly points this out. See Jesus and Easter, Abingdon Press, 1990, pp. 54-55. It cannot be disputed that different circles in early Christianity held to different understandings of the death of Jesus. In the material of the synoptic tradition there is the thought that the death of Jesus was a consequence of his activity. Jesus is portrayed there as one who by his activities risked persecution, and even death. He is not, however, portrayed as one who had wanted his own death, or even as one who had understood it as a vicarious or atoning death. The idea of the death of Jesus as an atonement is foreign to the material of the synoptic tradition, although it was later inserted at two places, Mark 10:45 and 14:24. Rather, Jesus dies because he hazarded death in the way he carried on his activity. In the formulas and especially in Paul's letters, the understanding of Jesus' death as an atonement is evident. Historically and theologically this idea has been of greater significance, yet it is only one understanding of the death of Jesus. The fact remains that from the Bible alone we cannot get a clear picture